Welcome back to part two of what elite freshman college students and recently tenured professors should really be seeking in college. If you don't remember, in part one, which if you haven't seen, I highly recommend you watch first because it has a lot of foundational principles that we're going to build on in the second part. In part one, we talked about all about the idea that college, at its very core, principally could be about growing your knowledge, love, and consciousness. I know that's radical, but the reason that we started with that is that right now we're going through the biggest questioning point in a long time for higher education with the MAGA movement and also with AI and the internet. Some AI even being able to teach better than some teachers in college. So this is the most important time that we have to be focusing on showing what the value of higher education is. And for freshman college students, this is the best time for you to be working on yourself before you enter into the adult world. So if you don't know what you should really be seeking, that is a huge missing out point for you in your ventures outside of college afterward. Aside from building knowledge, love, and consciousness, we also talked about building wisdom, building our understanding of the systemic inequities that elite college system is built upon and society as a whole, and how we can help disadvantaged students because of that. We talked about building more critical thinking skills, systems thinking, and holism. That was everything that we covered in part one. Now I'm really excited for part two. Right after I scratch my head. And the reason is that part two is more practical than part one. Part one is more principally profound, but part two is really getting into the nitty-gritty of some of the more practical stuff that you should really be focusing on in college. We started with all the part one stuff because it builds into what I'm going to talk about now, but this is even more gold. This is the stuff that, even aside from what we talked about in part one, you can actively start working on day to day, either as a student, building these things in your own college experience, or as a professor trying to build these things into your classes. So with that being said, let's start out with golden principle number 5 out of the 10 principles that we're looking into. You ready for it? Here we go. What you should really be seeking in college is fostering intrinsic motivation and self-regulation. Now, before we get into that, why am I talking about motivation? Why do I have the credentials? Apart from just being fascinated by this and having a psych degree, I currently work at the Octalysis Group, which is a company oriented around integrating behavioral science principles to make important things more enjoyable and enjoyable things more productive. We take the principles often from video games and what makes video games so engaging and fun and motivating, and then we put that into real life experiences in order to make them more fun, engaging, effective, motivating. This company has interacted with over 150 companies in the world, from Lego to Microsoft to governments, Google, and it has impacted over 1 billion user experiences with over 3,000 research studies in the Octalysis framework itself, which is the framework that we use to understand all human motivation and implement into our designs when we're working in the Octalysis group. So I know a decent bit about human motivation, just a smidgen. And now I want to apply that to a college context. You can see I'm really excited for this because this is something that could radically transform the educational system, not just for students, but for professors as well. So let's start by understanding the problems with motivation in college. Let's use a metaphor for how motivation is currently understood. When I say this, I don't want to imply this is consciously the metaphor that students or professors are using. In fact, because you're watching this video, you might ascend past this metaphor and see deeper into the problems with it. But the problem is a lot of people still follow this unconsciously, and this metaphor is baked into the structure, the processes, and the culture of the college system. So it's really important to understand motivation through this metaphor because it still impacts the college system. That metaphor is, unfortunately, we still see motivation as like motivating a factory worker. And this comes from the Industrial Revolution, when everything became more standardized, systematized, routine. We started seeing efficiency as and effectiveness as how much product we could get over a certain input of time. And the more product we could get in the less input of time and energy, the better. In this motivation style, workers are motivated by extrinsic motivations primarily, a carrot on a stick. You can see where grades come in as we start talking about this. And if we just give people better carrots and more carrots, that will motivate them to do more work, more effective work, more creative work. What I want you to ask yourself is, does this motivational strategy currently work in the college system? Just like before, please get out a pen and pad. This is not meant to be ideology. I'm not meant to preach at you. You need to contemplate this stuff for your own. The goal of these videos, and I will say this every single video because it cannot be emphasized enough, is to give you the mindsets, the first principles to be able to contemplate these things for yourself. Because I am a human being. And, well, we won't get into that. I am a human being and I can make mistakes too. So the goal is for you to be able to contemplate and come to the insights that I do, hopefully, if you realize they're true yourself. I'm going to trust that you wrote down some stuff on that question. And now, what I want to give you is a new metaphor of human motivation. This is human-centric motivation, and is primarily defined by the idea that humans are not motivated primarily by carrots on a stick and more carrots and better carrots. Rather, we are beings with fears and values and relationships to the things that we do. And taking us and treating us as robots gets rid of all of that in the snap of your finger. And the interesting thing about humans is that we tend to adopt the role that other people believe we should fit. So if we see motivation as primarily carrot on a stick, that's how people are going to be motivated. Whereas if we see motivation more as primarily motivated by values and intrinsic motivation and creativity and all the other things that I'll talk about soon, people will fit into that mold. This doesn't apply everywhere. Of course, if you don't have your survival needs met, it's harder to be intrinsically motivated, and this metaphor won't work as well. But I mean, come on. We're in an Ivy League education or other elite college. It's unlikely that most of the students going here are severely lacking in their survival needs. So we absolutely can move more towards the new human-centric style of motivation. Before we dive really deep into that human-centric style of motivation, let's talk about why this extrinsic way of seeing motivation is a problem. The first is that the world requires more and more learning because of AI and the internet. And if you don't have the intrinsic motivation to learn, you're going to fall behind. With AI, the fascinating thing about it is that it's really, really good at specialization. You've probably experienced this yourself. If you train it on a really, really narrow set of data, for example, your own writing is what I've done it a lot of time for myself. I've trained it on my own writing, my own metaphors I like to use, the imagery styles, my voice. It is really good at creating writing in my voice. I need to give it the ideas to write about, but it's really good at that. What it's not good at, and is outside of the scope of this video, but is true, is that it's very bad at being generalist. We're very far from general AI, if ever we'll reach it. And that'll be a whole video in itself on how to use AI effectively inside of college, both as a professor and as a student. But the good news is, because it's a terrible generalist, that means that if you build all of these general skills and specializations in a few areas, which is ultimately the whole frame that I want college students to come out of this video in terms of skill development with, then you will be incredibly valuable in this new society. But you need intrinsic motivation to do that, because your classes are not going to teach you the generalist skills that you need in order to succeed. They'll teach you some of them, but as we'll get to later in this list, a lot of what we're teaching in college is not as practical in the outside world as we would hope. So you need intrinsic motivation to do that. Another issue is extrinsic motivation doesn't incentivize the other principles that we've been discussing. It incentivizes shallower spiral knowing. If you don't remember what spiral knowing is, go back to part 1. Again, all of this video is built on that. The reason it incentivizes shallower spiral knowing is that a lot of the deeper levels of spiral knowing require really large degrees of effort. I mean, think about it. You're creating, you're teaching, you're reflecting, you're experiencing. If you're in the practical band, you're evaluating or analyzing. And it's really hard to get yourself to do that with extrinsic motivation, because extrinsic motivation incentivizes quicker, just get it done mentalities. It's not going to incentivize that harder effort. There's a fascinating book that dives into this exact principle, which is Drive by Daniel H. Pink. And if you read that, you'll see a lot of studies on how extrinsic motivation affects your creativity, your willingness to do effort. There's actually good research showing that it lowers your creativity, lowers your willingness to persevere through a hard task, which is actually what we don't want when it comes to shallower spiral, when it comes to getting deeper into spiral knowing. Another issue is that intrinsic motivation is really what's necessary to build your love. This is going back to principle number 1, the second part, building love. How are you going to build love extrinsically, right? Imagine if your friend came up to you and, oh my God, it's just crazy even thinking about this. Imagine if your friend came up to you and they're like, yeah, I need a favor. I need a ride to the airport. And I know you're busy. I know that we just saw each other and you might be sick of me, but tell you what, I'll give you $200 in order to do it. You would be deeply offended if your friend did that, because they're treading on the intrinsic value of the relationship itself. So this expands out to love in general. Is extrinsically motivated people find it harder to love because it requires intrinsic motivation to build that. Another issue is you're not going to work on your consciousness for similar reasons as before. How are you going to be motivated to work on developing your awareness of self-deceptions, of becoming aware of the movie theater that you've been engaged in your own mind, of learning to see deeper and deeper into reality, when none of these things have a clear connection to extrinsic achievement? Now, hilariously, I'm going to make a whole video in the future, which I think you'll love if you're watching this, all about conscious accomplishment and how to build spiritual growth through the accomplishments that you pursue in college. So it's actually deeply practical to build your consciousness. And yet it's not seen that way because it's a very long-term ephemeral thing. So that's another issue of extrinsic motivation. Lower wisdom, similar reasons as before. Why are you going to care about wisdom when, for all respective purposes, it's not really talked about that much in society? It's not seen as a thing to strive for in traditional success. It's really airy-fairy. What does it even mean? Most people, when they think wisdom, they think of some like guru on a mountaintop or something. So it's not motivating to do if you're primarily extrinsically motivated. Lower care for how you affect systemic inequalities. If you're extrinsically motivated, then the systemic inequalities are good for you. You see them as a good thing. I'm not saying you do. I'm just saying if you're primarily extrinsically motivated. Because what do they do but help you get farther in your extrinsic motivations? Thus, only perpetuating the systemic inequities that are occurring in society and not helping any of the disadvantaged, oppressed people. And finally, it's going to lower your critical thinking. Why would you critically think about something, go deeper in the spiral knowing, if it doesn't have clear extrinsic rewards in the moment? It's a very long-term thing that makes critical thinking valuable, just like all these other principles. Another issue is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. As I said earlier, if you think people are primarily motivated by extrinsic motivation, and you think you are as well, then you'll continue to live that way. And you'll never see the value of intrinsic motivation. It also leads to burnout. Now, there's different types of burnout, so we need to be careful here of just labeling one over the top. But there's two particular types of burnout that are, well, actually three that are relevant here. The first is overexertion burnout. This is when you just work too much. That can easily happen when you're primarily extrinsically motivated because you just want to keep doing stuff in order to accomplish more and get more of the things that you're motivated for. And if you keep doing stuff way too long, that's going to lead to overexertion burnout. Then we have lack of rest burnout. This is similar to overexertion burnout, but it's different in that this burnout comes because you don't have enough times in your life where you're truly resting. And we need to be careful here with the term rest, because when I say rest, leisure, I don't mean scrolling through TikTok or watching a film while anxious about homework that you're going to do. Rest and leisure are very much a relational thing. So I should have said with the scrolling through TikTok, that could be a form of rest, but it entirely depends on your relationship to the thing that you're doing for if it's rest or not. If your relationship to the rest is, and I really resonate with this if it is, because I've done this so many times in my life. If your relationship to rest is, I'm doing this so that I can do more work later on, that's not rest. That's conscious, restful accomplishment. And you'll notice the difference even when you're doing the rest in the moment. You'll see, oh my God, should I be doing work? How much have I rested already? Is that enough to keep doing work? Right? It's not even relaxing. It's actually like, it's almost anxiety producing to do the rest itself because you're doing it for the ability to do more work later on. And that over time, if you don't have those true moments of rest, can lead to burnout, which is more likely when you're extrinsically motivated because there's more stuff that you're thinking about. Oh, I need to do this once I finish this resting to accomplish more. And finally, the last sort of burnout is purposeless burnout. This is when you might not even be overexerting yourself. You might be resting enough. And yet, because there's a lack of a feeling of genuine purpose in what you're doing, it ends up sucking your soul. And this might be actually one of the most common types of burnout because most people, even in elite colleges, from my experience, they don't work to such an insane degree that it would be overexertion burnout. We'll get to deep work later on. Most people aren't working as effectively as they think. And a lot of people maybe suffer from the rest burnout, but this is even more likely, especially when you're intrinsically motivated, because if you're extrinsically motivated primarily, by definition, you don't feel that much purpose in what you're doing, because purpose is an aspect of intrinsic motivation. So this is probably the most insidious type of burnout and problems with extrinsic motivation. You get dead inside students that aren't motivated by what they're doing, and it's killing them. I see it when I walk around campus sometimes. I see Cornell students just walking to class with their backpacks, that backs curved as if they're holding like 1,000 pounds. They don't need to go to the gym. They're going to the gym just by walking to class and holding all of their sadness. I'm not saying you fit into this group. I'm just saying these are the people that I'm trying to help with these videos. This is what I want to try and navigate. And I want to dive a little more, now that we've navigated some of the problems with extrinsic motivation. Let's really get concrete about the nuances of what extrinsic motivation is, using Octalysis framework, as I mentioned before. And that will give us more clarity over why this is happening. Now, unfortunately, I can't in this video, because it would be way too long, give all of the solutions. And I encourage you to come up with the solutions yourself, because when you are aware of a problem, that's when you're able to fix it. I will go into solutions in other videos in the future, but I'm mostly going to be highlighting the problems in this video. And your seeking is about solving those problems. So the biggest problem, which I'm going to connect to the Octalysis framework, and I mentioned a little beforehand for this extrinsic motivation issue, is that we have a grade-focused culture obsessed with toxic productivity. This is primarily a problem in elite colleges. I have a lot of examples of this in my own experience at Cornell. I remember there was one time where I was talking with a friend at Olin Library. They had bags under their eyes. They were drinking this huge thing of black coffee, like this big. And it was 8 p.m., so they weren't going to bed anytime soon. And I was like, hey, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And they told me they had 4 exams in the next week. One after the other, after the other, after the other. That's insane. These were all like midterm level exams. The professors must not have been talking to each other in order to see when the exam times were. Not blaming you all. I know it's really hard to navigate all the exam schedules, but this was the reality of the situation. And this is not only issue is with the structure when the exams are, it's also this toxic grade-focused productivity culture. So much of the conversations when I was at Cornell were around almost trophy badging how much you were suffering. I'm talking people discussing how bad their sleep was, how much homework they have, how much they studied for an exam, how much they're doing, like the clubs that they're in and the credits that they're taking. And the horrible thing is that this very culture perpetuates itself. When you invest in this culture, which I know can be fun sometimes, I even did it at times, but I was very conscious when I did it to not do it too much. Because when this becomes the norm, it becomes like a gas, just like infesting all of the Cornell environment and other elite colleges until everyone is toxically productive and grade focused. So why is this bad for motivation? Let's really get concrete about this. This is the gold. It's because it creates too much black hat left brain motivation. I know I just threw some jargon terms at you, but In order to explain what that is, so you can become aware of the problem, let's dive into a brief description of what the octalysis framework is, which is what I've been working with over the last year with the octalysis group. So the octalysis framework is shaped like an octagon with 8 different core drives around it. These core drives sum up all human motivation. If you do not have any one of these core drives in an experience, there is zero motivation to do anything. And the reason that we came up with this as a motivational framework is because you, Kai, who's the creator of it, reverse engineered what makes video games so engaging and motivating and enjoyable, thus creating these core drives. So let's go through each of those 8 and then connect them back to the grade obsessed productivity culture. Firstly, core drive 1, epic meaning and calling. This is the motivation we have to partake in something greater than ourselves. Think helping bring poetry as an art form to mainstream society because you love it so much. Creating machines that help the world as a mechanical engineer. Showing the importance of a liberal arts education as a liberal arts professor. And bettering science through doing research or mentoring students as a STEM professor. Then we have core drive 2, development and accomplishment, which is the motivation we have not only to develop and attain mastery over things, but also to achieve, to get accolades. This could be bettering your writing skills in college. It could be getting better grades, more accomplishment, sort of CD2. It could be more literature analysis for a book that you're writing and feeling developed because of that. And it could be getting a major finding in an experiment that you're doing and feeling accomplished because of that. Then we have core drive 3, which is empowerment of creativity and feedback. This is the motivation we have to use our creative skills to come up with new things and iterate through getting feedback. This could be writing a philosophy paper or solving a problem set problem in a way that you haven't really seen anyone else do before. It could be developing a new humanities course or designing a new experiment for your lab. Core drive 4 is ownership and possession. This is the motivation we have to own not only things, but also own our identity, our values that we have. This could be owning grades and having an identity of being someone that has good grades. It could be owning one's values or roles in a project or a group project in college. It could be being influenced, or not being influenced, but possessing things for class or teaching like a MacBook or a good classroom and time slot if you're a professor. Then we have core drive 5, which is social influence and relatedness. This is the motivation we have to compete, to collaborate, to fit in with other people or to not fit in with other people, influenced by them, to connect. This could be collaborating in a group project or competing in a curved class. Hopefully you're not in one of those. It could be being influenced by other studies in the research niche that you're a part of, or other books in your field of humanities research. Core drive 6 is scarcity and impatience. This is the motivation we have to attain things which are scarce, or to do things when there is little time to do them. This could be, and I'm sure I'm looking at you when I say this one, because even I've done this. I know everyone's done it. Cramming for an exam the night before it happens. Naughty. It could be trying to get in a popular class during pre-enroll, which a huge amount of students are trying to get into. The impatience of that and the scarcity. It could be trying to fit in all the material that you need to cover for your curriculum inside of a little class session. I'm sure you've seen teachers do this where they're just scrambling on the board. They're like, I got to get it all down. Then we have core drive 7, unpredictability and curiosity. This is the motivation we have to fulfill curiosity gaps and to pursue things that we aren't certain about. There's good research showing that we're actually more motivated by variable rewards than defined rewards, which is connected to this core drive. This could be scrolling through short form content, right? You don't know what's going to come up. It could be being curious about evolutionary psychology or torque when it comes up in your classes. It could be double majoring, looking at all you double majors or even triple majors. I once met a quadruple major, and they looked like they were dead inside. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying they were. It could be seeing what students say to a question and being curious about what they'll say about that. Then we have, last but certainly not least, core drive 8, which is loss and avoidance. The motivation we have to avoid negative feelings and losing what we already have, or losing a potential thing that we could have. This could be avoiding waking up early because it sucks. It could be not wanting to step out of your comfort zone if you're in a more structured major. It could be not wanting to ask students for feedback on your course because you're scared of what they would say. Now we can have some interesting conversation about the octalysis framework now that you know all 8 drives, which, congratulations, by the way. You know more about motivation than most people now. This is gold. Like, this literally defines all human motivation, except for one core drive, which is outside, but that's irrelevant to the discussion right now. Maybe when I do a video about octalysis and college concretely, that's when we'll talk about that. So an interesting thing about the octalysis framework is you can also split it into right brain and left brain, and white hat and black hat. Now, I'm going to flash up on screen for a second, as I already did earlier, a picture of the octalysis framework so that you can see the visual. If you're listening and you can't see the visual, totally fine. You don't have to see the visual to understand the framework. I'm going to explain what right brain, left brain, white hat, black hat means now. So white hat core drives, which are the top 3 in the octagon, CD1, CD2, CD3, they make us feel in control, powerful, agentic. Black hat core drives on the bottom of the octagon, CD6, CD7, and CD8, generally make us feel out of control, fearful, non-agentic, non-powerful. These are just generalities. There's, of course, caveats for all of them. Right brain core drives, which are CD5, CD3, CD7, make us feel intrinsically motivated. They're intrinsic motivators. Left brain core drives, CD4, CD2, CD6, make us feel extrinsically motivated. And now, with this understanding of octalysis, we can say why the toxic productivity grade culture and the extrinsic motivating incentive is so bad. The reason is this motivates primarily the left brain and the black hat core drives, which are development and accomplishment, ownership and possession, scarcity and impatience, loss and avoidance, and unpredictability and curiosity. The problem is that leads to all the problems that we mentioned beforehand. Shallower spiral knowing, focus on extrinsic motivators, possessing, owning things, always feeling like you're motivated more by cramming and deadlines than you are by intrinsically setting up your own stuff. More motivated by fear, loss and avoidance rather than love. Remember our whole principle about love. If you're primarily in a culture with structures and processes that are in left brain, black hat core drives, that literally hurts your ability to love, because it's super hard to motivate yourself to build that love when this is the primary culture. Now, I don't want to make it sound like black hat left brain core drives are always bad. Absolutely not. In fact, all of those core drives I just mentioned that fit into those categories can be made into more white hat right brain depending upon how they're implemented. Just one example, development and accomplishment. If you prioritize the development part of development and accomplishment, it becomes right brain, because now this is the motivation we have just to get better at something, even if nobody else sees it. Like just playing guitar on your own. Maybe you'll play it for others. You don't really care. You just want to get better because you love playing the guitar. And that applies to all the core drives down there. As well, another point we should make is that sometimes they're good for pushing us to go out of our comfort zone, to take the leap when we know we should, but don't because it's hard. So a good example, scarcity and impatience. Setting deadlines for yourself can make you impatient to do the things that you're intrinsically motivated for. So like none of these core drives in the left brain black hat are all bad. In fact, we should be building those to some degree. The problem is we're too focused on them. We need to build and seek in college more of the white hat right brain core drives if we're going to be able to navigate this problem. So now that we've navigated all of octalysis and the problems associated with that, I want to dive quickly into expanding the problem in how autonomy, mastery, relatedness, and purpose are not built inside of college. This is very connected to octalysis, but octalysis is a different frame for seeing motivation. This is the frame of self-determination theory mixed with drive that I mentioned earlier, which are two other intrinsic theories of motivation. They connect very deeply with octalysis, but I find when specifically talking about intrinsic motivation, they're a little bit better. So we're diving even deeper. I know you thought we already went really deep, but we're going even deeper into the problems of motivation in college because it's so important to understand. So the first major issue is we don't have enough autonomy inside of the college system. And again, I'm not saying that you fit necessarily into this as a professor or a student, but these are generalities that I'm saying here. So example is we're only given, let's say, one essay or one essay option or one problem set problem option. And that really hurts our autonomy. I should define what autonomy is. It's just the agency over what, when, how, where, why, and with who you do something with. Deeply intrinsically motivating. And a good example of a class that didn't do this, which made me so happy, was my educational psychology class. Oh my God, when we got to the end of that class, the professor showed on the board that we had 3 different options for what we could do. We could either make a gamification connected, that's what I ended up doing. We could either like connect it to a real world education class that we were in, or connect 2 different principles that we learned throughout the class towards each other, or some third thing I can't remember. And I ended up making a presentation on how gamification connects to education, which I wouldn't have been able to do anywhere else. And it felt so good. I was so passionate about that. And I did so much more work than some other classes I've been in because of the autonomy I had. Now, sometimes we're also told there's only one way to do something, and we're not rewarded for creative solutions out of this. And a really unfortunate example I have of this is I wrote an intergroup dialogue essay, and I decided, wait, I'm not going to do it in academic style. That's boring. We've seen that. I'm going to do it in a blog post writing style, because I've done a whole bunch of blog post writing, and I want to push that sort of that engaging style into this class. It's not a research paper. Why can't I do blog post style writing? So I explained my reasoning. I showed that students would be more engaged reading this compared to the traditional form, and I almost failed. The teacher was not happy. They were like, "What is this this travesty of blog post writing. And they didn't actually say that, but I felt very sad and very unautonomous in that moment. We're also not given reign over creating our own projects in class and connecting our own interests to it in a lot of classes. And this is why I was so motivated to create content outside of Cornell in my content creation, because I had infinite creative freedom, so much autonomy, and it felt incredible. Another problem, secondly, with intrinsic motivation in regards to self-determination theory and drive is we're not given enough mastery in our classes. Mastery is the motivation to get better at something and also feel like you've mastered something. This connects really deeply to CD2 inside of the Octalysis framework. One of the problems is we have abysmal feedback times. I got a test for my strategic thinking class back 3 weeks after we did the test, and no opportunity for a retake, by the way. And there was also no showcase in the grading of the core concepts, which I didn't understand. It was just, here's what you did wrong. Yeah. What am I supposed to do with that? If I can't retake the test and I don't have an understanding of what I did wrong, then there's no incentive for me to integrate that feedback going forward, and I don't grow from it. Another problem is that the feedback itself is of low quality. There's 3 different types of feedback, which are outcome-focused, information-focused, and corrective-focused. Outcome-focused is the dominant form we get, which is it's just the grading of the outcome of the thing. Grades. Information-focused feedback is feedback focused on what you did wrong, but not necessarily how to improve it. I've gotten this a few times in my college education, and God, it's been incredible every time I do, because I'm like, wow, actual feedback on how to improve. Now, it needs to be careful that it's personalized to the person and not forcing them into a mold, of course, but it's much preferable for me over outcome feedback. And then finally, the unholy, the very rare endangered species inside of the college system is corrective feedback. This is feedback over not only what you did wrong, but also how to improve it. Again, caveat that needs to be molded to the person itself and not too constraining. And I'm not saying that we need to get rid of outcome feedback, get rid of information, and just focus on corrective. That would actually be bad too. Outcome and information can both be extremely useful. Outcome can just give you an idea more frequently because it's easier to do about if you're on the right path to doing something. But we do need to try and have more corrective feedback and seek more of that in our college experiences. We also have bad representations of mastery. I talked a lot about the problems with grades, Goodhart's law, and the other parts of this video. So I'm not going to go more into that, but I do want to emphasize again how much, for the most part, our college system is still focused on the propositional and the lower end of the practical band, which again is remembering, understanding, applying, maybe analyzing. And you might say, as a professor, that no, Aiden, I do focus on the lower parts of spiral knowing. I do evaluate. I do create. I do teach. But I want you to be very careful here on differentiating between the content of a class and the structure in relation to spiral knowing. The content is the actual propositions of what you say. And you might have content that is in a deeper band. For example, you might have a science class about research methods that teaches evaluative content, like I did in my research methods class. It taught us how to assess and evaluate a research study. But here's the problem. The structure is your actual relationship to the content. And this is much more important for where you are in spiral knowing than the content. In my research methods class, yes, we got taught content for how to evaluate studies, and then we never did it. So we never actually went deeper in spiral knowing. We stayed at the top. In fact, it was very shallow because we ended up mostly doing remembering and understanding and almost no application whatsoever. Except for, I'll admit, one study that we did end up creating at the end of the year. So that was good. Props to the professor there. But the structure of the class was not good representation of mastery and deepening your spiral knowing. Another problem is mastering theory, but not application in context. This is a huge general issue in the college system, is we'll often get taught the theory of things, but because we don't apply it, not only do we not learn it as well, but also, as we know, generalizing out of the context that something's supposed to be applied in often loses the nuance. And a good example is my strategic thinking class, where we were talking about game theory and how it applies to real world situations, which you think would apply to the context. And yet, not really, because we never actually applied it in our own lives in real life. And I think if we did, we would have uncovered an insight that I had the entire time I was thinking of the class, which we didn't, which is the way that we were thinking about game theory, I just have overall problems with, because game theory overall tends to think of humans as very rational actors without emotions and problems of their own, like behavioral economics does. And so we think, what are the people going to do if they were acting most rationally? Which never happens, rarely. So we'd end up coming to conclusions in the class that were utterly baffling to me because they were completely shredded of the human context of emotions and feelings. And that was really difficult for me in feeling like I was motivated to even learn in the class intrinsically, because I was like, we're just not really learning true mastery here. And then the last problem is, are we even well, actually, this isn't the last problem. It's just one more aspect, is, are we even teaching the right things to master? I'm going to leave this discussion to a little later, where I have even more to talk about in regards to what we could be teaching that we're not. So we'll start with just that as a point. Growth mindset is not reflected in the structure, the processes, the culture of the class. I have a really awful example of this. When I was first in college, I was taking Chem 2070. I was standing with a group of students doing a problem on the whiteboard. The professor walked into the class and instantly everyone went silent. Like it was genuinely like a blue whale was coming for a pack of krill, and we were just like. So he comes up to us, he carves out this little part inside of our group, and he looks at the board and he just. And then he looks at all of us. You guys are all robots. You don't know how to think for yourselves. Now, admittingly, that was one of the worst cases you could possibly have. That was like abysmally bad professor behavior. But my point that I want to make generally is that growth mindset is not reflected in the structure, the processes, the culture of the class. And this pushes more loss and avoidance. It pushes less of a want to master the content genuinely, because why would you master it if you have to step out of your comfort zone and fail in order to do that? And finally, material is not personalized to students' mastery goals, which is very unfortunate because every single student has unique goals that they're pursuing inside of college, and interests and values and whatnot. And if we just treat all of the students like they're the same, then we can't leverage the motivation that might come from having that autonomy and mastery through having your own mastery goals. Now, I get it. Some of your classes are huge. You might be teaching, especially if you're in STEM, 1,000-person lecture halls. That's really hard to personalize the content to, yes. But we could still try and do more with TAs and how they personalize the content in their discussion sections or whatnot to a student's mastery goals, even with that knowledge. Going further, another issue with intrinsic motivation is we don't have enough relatedness. This is the motivation, kind of like CD5, to connect, to compete, to collaborate with people in self-determination theory. And the reason for this is there's little work done to deeply connect students in class. And I get it. Again, we want to get through the curriculum. We want to teach students what's valuable, and we see the value in getting them to learn the material that we have. But they're only going to learn it more if they're intrinsically motivated by having deep connections with each other. And most of my classes didn't have activities where we were talking about our values and our interests with each other in a really intimate way. And I feel a lot of a missed opportunity there because of that. There was little work done to connect learnings to the community. I literally had a community psychology class where we never connected anything to the actual community. We just talked about it. And then the community was right outside of the classroom. Literally, if you just stepped out, you would have seen the Cornell community. And we never connected with them. I was so baffled. I was like, I honestly speechless. I didn't know what to say. So that's a problem. Another issue is professors and students are often not very close, and they don't share intimate aspects with each other. Again, I get it. Students and professors, from the student perspective, your professor sometimes you revere as like this godlike being. Like, oh, how could I talk to them? How could I have something interesting to say? Isn't there other students that want their time? Why should I get it? And from the professor perspective, because I've talked to a lot of professors and also my parents, my dad in particular is a professor. My mom used to be one. They're very strapped for time doing research. They have other relationships with their professors. They don't sometimes know how to talk to Gen Z as much because their motivations are very strange in comparison to other generations sometimes. A good counterexample, though, is my dad. He's a professor of Russian literature and environmental studies. And his connection with his students, he'll tell me stories, and I'm just like baffled at what they will tell him and the deep conversations they will have. Like, I don't know, they just share the most intimate parts of their life with him, their insecurities, their afterlife plans. I don't know what he's doing in his classroom, but he's doing something right. And if we had more of that connection between the professors and the students, which is one of my motivations for this whole channel is bridging the student-professor perspective, then a lot of that relatedness, power would just skyrocket in intrinsic motivation. And the last thing that we could build for more intrinsic motivation is purpose. This is deeply underappreciated inside of college. It's often relegated to the advisors, the career advisors particularly, and not really talked about much in class itself, which is really unfortunate because I've talked to a lot of students, and for them, a lot of them think that purpose is something they focus on a little later in college when they've explored more of their major, seen more people. And it's really unfortunate because I'm going to have a whole video on life purpose as it connects to college, but purpose is incredibly powerful intrinsic motivation. It makes you feel more agentic and gets you out of bed in the morning. It makes things stick out to you because you have goals, long-term goals. And that adds more emotions to your learnings, which in turn makes them actually last longer inside of your memory. So purpose is actually practical for learning as well. It's not just a distraction that we shouldn't be focusing on because it doesn't help with learning. Right now, there's little connection to current events or relevant aspects of a student's life inside of class. And that could cultivate more of a sense of purpose because you see how the learnings are connected and you see how they're affecting things, hitting back on Core Drive 1, epic meaning and calling. And we could have more of an attempt to discover the student's life purpose, to discuss it inside of classroom settings instead of relegating it just to the student to do on their own with the advisors. So that's everything about intrinsic motivation. You probably know more about the problems with intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation in college than you were even expecting coming into this video. For both students and professors, I have one question, which is for students, how can you build more white hat, right brain motivation in your studies and black hat, left brain motivation when it helps you grow? And also, how can you build more autonomy, mastery, relatedness, and purpose inside of your studies? For professors, the exact same, but applied to your classroom. How can you build more white hat, right brain motivations in the very structured processes and culture of the classroom itself? And how can you build more autonomy, mastery, and relatedness inside of the structure, culture, and processes? Those two questions are gold for you in building this intrinsic motivation. And after a short break, we'll then talk about self-regulation when it comes to college as well, which is a huge other aspect of building intrinsic motivation too, but also building this fifth principle of what you should be seeking in college. On top of principle number 5, building intrinsic motivation, we also want to build self-regulation. What self-regulation is the set of processes for regulating ourselves at the level of physiology, emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in order to resist problematic impulses, promote adaptive behavior, and pursue long-term goals. I know that was a big definition, but I learned this in my self-regulation class. I know, crazy that you would learn about self-regulation in self-regulation. And by the way, if I seem very energetic, it's because I very stupidly decided to drink another cup of coffee for this video. And I am distinctly aware at how much more present and pausing I was in the first part, which I'm now going to do, not artificially by pausing right now. Okay, maybe a slight artificial pause, but I'm going to try and tone down my energy a little because I tend to be a very energetic guy because I'm excited about sharing this with you. So what are some examples of self-regulation? Good diet, sleep, exercise, great time management skills, great emotional skills, great conscious relationships, not just with family, but also with friendships and romantic partners, goal setting abilities, reflection abilities like meditation and contemplation and journaling, habit change, an understanding of how habits are built, and some good habits of your own, as well as breaking of bad habits. And finally, mention it in reflection, but meditation and contemplation are really key to self-regulation. Why is this important? Hopefully it's intuitive, but I really want to push just how important it is, because a lot of people, from my experience in college, especially the students, don't appreciate basic self-regulation skills enough. It literally affects everything else in college. I cannot emphasize enough how much 2 hours of sleep that you don't get at night will affect every other part of your life. We need to think really holistically here. Remember holistic thinking in part 1. When you don't sleep well, that affects everyone else, you and every goal that you're pursuing. And I think this is what students don't appreciate enough. I often hear students at Cornell talk, and also other elite colleges, talk about how busy they are and self-deprecate on how little they're sleeping as if it's just a them problem and not an anyone else problem. But it's an everyone problem because it affects your friendships. And I want to be really careful not to offend anyone when I say this, but it is true if you really contemplate about that. And that is, you're being incredibly selfish when you don't have good self-regulation abilities. I don't mean that as in you're a bad person. I mean that in when you don't self-regulate, you are implicitly telling your friendships, your family relationships, your romantic partner, yourself as well, and your goals, that they do not deserve the respect and appreciation that they do. Because by not having those self-regulatory abilities, you're not able to come to them as openly and incredibly as you could if you did have them. So this is really important. And the problem is self-regulation advice and principles are basically not almost at all inside of the structure, the processes, and the culture of the college system right now. Let me show you why. As I've explained, there's too much work. We try and constrain all this curriculum into a small period and expect students to be able to study for all these exams, even when they're back to back, like the 4 exams back to back that I told you about, that one crazy occurrence. There's no flex days. I really appreciated when I saw this in my self-regulation class. Ironically, or unironically, they had good structural principles for self-regulation. Flex days are days that you get to take off on an assignment and extend for one day because you have a lot of work or your mental health is struggling or whatever other reason. We got 3 of these throughout the entire semester. I personally didn't use any because, not to brag, but I usually would do stuff a week beforehand because I didn't want to run into this self-regulation problem. And I noticed a lot of students really appreciated them as well for when their work didn't align well with other professors. The professor didn't even have to talk with other professors. They just could see that people had flex days and they could use them when it conflicted with other professor schedules, which makes it easier for the professor as well. A big problem is that assignments are due at midnight or at 6 a.m., at least from my experience at Cornell. This seems like, of course, why would they not be? That's when the next day comes. Think about what the incentive structure is of having an assignment due then. Having an assignment due at midnight, because students don't have good intrinsic motivation and self-regulation abilities for the most part, so many of them will push all the work right up to the deadline, which leads them to skip out on hanging out with friends or doing relaxing activities at night because they're all working for the deadlines at night. If it's at 6 a.m., I have genuinely seen students more willing to wake up at like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning sometimes than just do the work the night before because the deadline's at 6 a.m. instead of 12 p.m. So both of these are awful. I suggest, and I haven't seen this implemented out, but just from my knowledge of incentive structures, that we have deadlines at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. instead. And that would be fantastic because now most students have an incentive to finish their work at a reasonable time and spend the night doing other things. And they still hopefully have some time during the day where they can work. And it's much less likely they're going to pull an all-nighter from an assignment due at 6 a.m. or stay up way too late for a 12 p.m. assignment. There's also the toxic productivity culture. We talked about that. No emotional intelligence work. I found it as good as the self-regulation class compared to other classes that I've had. Hilarious that we talked about emotional regulation and the methods that could go into it, and then we didn't do them. Like, we never applied them in the class. And it was valuable that we even talked about emotional regulation, even though we didn't apply it. There's generally just not enough conversation about this and application, even in non-emotional regulation relevant classes. This should be talked about. There's no conversations in class about holistic health, like sleep, diet, exercise. There's no mental health class at college. I didn't even have a mental health class in my high school, which I thought was insane. There's no goal setting. There's no reflection, no journaling, meditation, contemplation classes. Little conscious relationships work, which is incredible to me because there's a whole argument that one of the more important parts of college is the relationships you find rather than the education, as much as both of them are important. So the fact that there's not anything about that is honestly just baffling to me. And there's little productivity or time management work. You got to go into the self-help YouTube rabbit hole in order to find these. Little habit change work. Again, all of these you could find in some ways in college. I'm sure some professors talk about them. Maybe you do. Students might talk about them with each other. You can go to your career advisor or other advisor. But why do you have to go outside of class in order to get this core, essential, valuable self-regulation advice? So my question for students is, how can you start building self-regulation as a student? And my question for professors is, how can you start building self-regulation structures, practices or processes, and culture in your classroom? I'll let you contemplate that on your own. But we're going to get into principle number 6. I am very passionate about this one. I know I've said that for every single one, but this one in particular, I have a lot of stories that personally are relevant to me. And that is principle number 6 is about growing conscious friendships in college. This could be about family and romantic relationships too, but I wanted to focus on one because it would be too much to do all of them. I'm going to have whole episodes on both of those in the future. We're going to start with friendships because I think they're the most relevant, most unanimous for everyone. Right before, more energy, caffeine, ATP. I want to start with a story before I get into the problems of friendships right now and how to grow great conscious friendships. This one's tough for me. When I first came to college, I was really, really introverted. I had horrible social skills. I remember the first night that I came, there was this gathering on the North Quad of North Campus. And I remember walking in, there's just lights blaring down in the night, causing all these huge groups of people to be lit up. Bustling conversation, there's ice cream around. Even though people look like they're having fun, I was terrified because when I was in high school and all throughout growing up, I grew up in a really small rural town of Hamilton, New York. So I never had to build the social skills in order to be able to make new friends. I had the same friends since middle school. I didn't really have any friends when I was in elementary school. That's another story. So, yeah, I was really scared. And thankfully, I met someone else who seemed pretty scared at the gathering. We literally just bumped into each other. His name was Adam. And if you're watching this, hello, no hard feelings. We started talking pretty soon. We had a whole group of, I think, 10 people around us. This was my friend group for the first month of college. We did everything in O Week together. We painted, we went roller skating, we drew on the slope. It was really, really great for that first week. As time went on, I felt more and more disconnected with these friends. I felt like I would sometimes talk about the stuff that I was doing in content creation and I wouldn't really get anything back. I often felt like I was living two different worlds inside of college because on the one hand, I was a student and on the other, I was a content creator. And if I'm really being honest, I felt more like an imposter when I donned my backpack and laptop and notebook whenever I went to class. And then when I came back and I did content creation, that's when I really felt that I was embodying my true self. And I was hoping that this would solve itself throughout the semester, but I didn't, because I didn't want to find new friends, right? I was scared of being alone, scared of stepping out of my comfort zone and finding people who really resonated with me. I didn't even know what resonated mean. What am I supposed to look for in a friendship? So this all came to a culmination 1 month in when the whole friend group was getting together again. And I was so excited at RPCC because we hadn't seen each other as a whole friend group since O Week at the very beginning. Everyone was so busy. We're elite college students, so what are you going to do? So we get our food. We sit down at the table. I'm like, yes, everyone's together. Let's go. What are we going to talk about? And one by one, everyone went on their phones. Started scrolling through TikTok, watching short form videos. No one was really talking to each other. I remember feeling so utterly alone and lonely, even in this group. I took my still full plate of food. I threw it in the garbage because I lost my appetite. And I went to my room. And I have no hard feelings against these friend groups to this day, but I didn't talk to them after that. It was too painful for me. So, looking back, I'm glad that I went through this experience because it taught me a lot of what I'm going to tell you about makes up a fantastic friendship. Conscious friendship. And this isn't the first time that happened. I've lost a whole other friend group in my content creation space before. That's why I'm able to talk about this, is I've lost 2 entire friend groups, multiple friends, through something we'll talk about later called transformational conflict. And I've also lived in very difficult areas for most of my college experience, areas really far from the main part of campus, and therefore forcing me to set up every single one of my friendship interactions, which in the moment sucked. Looking back, incredibly happy that I had to do that because I had to be super conscious about who do I actually see, because I got to set it up to see them. And another reason I can talk about this is I have friendships across the whole lifespan. I'm very unique in that regard. Most students hang out with the same major in their dorm, same age, maybe a few years above or below. I have friendships across the whole lifespan. Most of my friends are actually 30 plus. I have friendships my age. I have friendships 5 years older, friendships 30 plus, friendships in their 50s and their 60s, 70s, whatnot. So I have a lot of experience in what actually makes a good friendship. It's not age, I can tell you that. So let me just highlight some quotes that I've come up from my conversations with other freshmen about what they think good friendship looks like and how their problems of friendship have coalesced. See if you can peg where you fit into this. Easy to make friends with people on floor and major. Struggle approaching to talk new people. Struggle finding time for friendships. Do I vibe with this person? People in my major tend to have more similarity and interest to me, so I find it easier to make friends there. I feel authentic around them. That's what I love. That's some, but not all, of the perceptions and problems that people have with friendships in college right now. Now, let's highlight some problems of what most freshmen that I've talked to think a conscious friendship is like. And I want to be really careful when I say this, that I'm not trying to be condescending or judgy in what I'm saying here. A lot of these are perfectly valid things to look for in a friendship. They're not what I want you to contemplate on the root of what makes an incredible conscious friendship, though. That's what I want to highlight. So let's go through this list. We look for people with the same interests as us. Oh, I'm into tennis, they're into tennis. I'm into skateboarding, they're into skateboarding. I'm into arts and crafts, they're into arts and crafts. We look for people with lots of drive. Oh, they're like super inspiring because they do so much and they're double majoring and they're in a lot of clubs. I want to be like that. We look for people who are very interesting. Like, oh, wow, they're a communist fascist. Whoa, like I want to hang out with that person more. We look for people who are fun to be around. Like, oh, I just feel good when I'm around them. They're fun. They're funny. That's why I like being with them. We look for people with the same values, right? If I value care, I'm hoping you value care. If I value loyalty, I hope you value loyalty. We look for people who are physically proximate to us. Maybe we don't do this consciously, but subconsciously, there's a lot of studies showing we tend to be friends with the people who are directly around us. That's why it's so common for you to be friends with your dorm mates, because they're right there. We look for people who we can be ourselves around. We want to feel authentic with them. We shouldn't feel like we have to wear a mask. Again, these are all decent things to look for and parts of what I'm going to talk about later. But they aren't what the root of what we should be looking for in a friendship. Before we move to what we should really be looking for, I want to talk about some problematic mindsets that we have about friendships in college and what problems they end up leading us into. The first is that we don't have an abundance mentality when it comes to friendships. When I was with my freshman friend group in that beginning story, I had this belief that if I couldn't become friends with these people, then I was screwed. I wouldn't be able to find friends anywhere, right? And I think even then, a part of me knew that was false. But I had this very scarce mindset when it came to friendships. I was like, if I don't make friends with these people, it's going to take a really long time to find other people who resonate with me. And fundamentally, that is not true. It's hard to hear in the moment, but there are so many people on your campus. You're at an elite college. There are so many incredible people that you could find. The filter has already gotten them here. There absolutely are others than the friends that you're with right now who would resonate with you, who will do all the things that I say below. It's just finding them and having patience that's the difficult part. But the first step to even being able to find them is having the abundance mentality to realize if you're not resonating with your current friend group to a certain degree and you can't change them, you might have to let go. And that's really hard to do. So that's one. The next big issue is we aren't our own primary caregivers. And to elaborate on this, I want to point you to a phenomenal book called You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. It's technically for romantic relationships, but it actually applies to friendships too. The essential idea is in Western culture especially, we're enamored with this idea that from Disney and TV shows and romance films, that the friendships and the romantic partner we have should be able to take care of us. They should be able to help us with our emotional struggles and help us navigate the issues that we're going through. Yes, they should be able to do that. Absolutely, I agree. Here's the issue, is when you put their ability to do that above your own. You make them the primary caregivers for you instead of being your own primary caregiver. This surrenders control over your own ability to take care of yourself to an external thing. And as we said in the first part, our relationship to external reality is life's problem. Those are the problems that we need to navigate, not necessarily the external things themselves, although sometimes our relationship can be changed by external things. It's really our relationship to external reality that is what we need to change. I'm sure you've experienced this where you solve a problem and then another problem comes up and then another problem comes up. It's never ending, right? You're always going to have problems. The solution, the ultimate problem in life is solving the root problem of how you relate to your problems. Ta-da! So applied to friendships, we can't rely on our friends solely to take care of ourselves. We need to build our own emotional intelligence, our own abilities to be alone on our own and take care of ourselves. Only you can solve your loneliness. Only you can solve your loneliness. I was talking with a friend the other day who's having difficulty with inauthenticity in their friendships. They feel like they are constantly wearing a mask around them. They're lonely when they're with them. And ultimately, one of the tough things I told them is, even though you should work on trying to better those relationships if you can, the problem of loneliness is not a friendship issue. It's a self-love issue. You should be able to be utterly and completely content on your own without anyone else. If you can do that, let me tell you, your relationships are going to be so much better than if you are coming at them from a feeling of need, of clinginess. And there is another story that I wanted to elaborate with this, which is, once you're doing all this work that I've described, as well as this primary caregiving stuff, you can experience something that I call transformational conflict, which is really scary if you don't know what it is. And that is, because you've done all of this work on yourself to grow your values, your skills, your purpose, your consciousness, your knowledge, your love, old values and relationships and habits and goals, they start to conflict with your new self. And that confliction can be extremely difficult, because you can go through this period where you're in utter conflict between those two selves, and you can experience so much suffering because you still haven't learned not to attach to things, and so much ego backlash from those experiences. So I've experienced this multiple times throughout this journey. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. You just have to get through it. I've come through the other side now, thankfully, but it is only something that you can solve through awareness, love for yourself, and an understanding that it might lead to you having to change your relationships, change your goals. As we said in the first part, die psychologically. Your identity needs to change. That is hard. It's really hard. I feel for you if you're going through that right now. And if you have to go through that from these videos, but it's worth it. Because the love that you will experience for all of life, for your friends, for yourself, if you do this work, is greater than anything that you'll get externally. Another problem with our relationship with friendships is we think we need to wait for others to set things up. I heard this a lot when talking with freshmen, is nobody's reaching out. Nobody's setting things up with each other. Unfortunately, the only thing I can say is you have to be the one to do it. You can't offload it on others. You're ceding control to this happening on others. I'm not saying you shouldn't expect and try and foster that habit in your friends as well, but you need to be the one to take responsibility, because you're watching this video. I was the one that had to set up everything because of my living situation, and by golly, was it worth it. I have such incredible friendships now because of all the work that I had to do, suffering in that first year of college and all throughout college, having to set these up. And the last major problem is we don't have emotional intelligence to the degree that we need for conscious friendships. We don't take responsibility for our parts in the problems that we have with relationships. From experience, I can tell you it's almost never fully one person's fault for something happening. It's almost always a two-way street, and you need to be able to take responsibility for that. We also sometimes aren't integrous with what we say we'll do with friends. You've experienced this. Hey, we'll see each other tomorrow for lunch. Yeah, sounds good. They never text you back. Or promising that you'll do work together. Doesn't happen. Promising to show up at a certain time. Doesn't happen. Maybe you're an hour late. Every single time that you say you'll do something to yourself or to someone else and you break that, you're losing integrity with yourself. I'm not saying you can never break anything. That would also be ridiculous. But this is a habit that will last of bad integrity throughout your whole life. And I don't want you to get into it now. And another issue is we don't have the guts to tell a person, because of emotional intelligence, when we aren't in a season to be friends with them. This is particularly hard if you haven't rooted your primary caregiving in yourself yet. What can happen is you feel responsible for someone else's well-being, and therefore you reach out to them trying to set up things, get them to a party, hang out with them, even though you don't actually like hanging out with them that much. I've experienced this multiple times. It's always been with someone else, and I'm the one that feels like, I don't really want to hang out with them. I don't mean that as a bragging thing. I just tends to be the case that my experience with this is it's been the other person that I don't want to hang out with. And it's hard to say, but you're again being selfish when you continue to see them, because this will pervade the relationship. It will pervade it in the sense that you can't be as intimate with your other friends who you do resonate with. And also it's leading them on, because you're subtly telling them that they deserve to be in the friend group and closer, but it's really not going to work out. This is a meta theme I want you to get from all these parts, is all problems at the end of the day, they dumb down to selfishness. It might seem like, oh, Aiden, that sounds black and white. No, it's not. It's a meta. Anything to the deepest level of reality will be so meta that it ends up sounding black and white or paradoxical, because it's so meta that it transcends the black and white thinking that you might have at non-meta levels. And this selfishness problem pervades so many friendships, of feeling like you need to help another person just because they're another human being, when in reality, you not helping yourself is actually hurting yourself, others, and society. And there's a balance here. I'm not telling you to never help others, of course. I'm telling you to be very conscious about when you are acting out of love and when you're acting out of fear. Like, oh, I don't want this person to hurt. I don't want this person to feel neglected, even though I don't resonate with them and I don't want to hang out with them. That's selfishness. So now that we've gone through some of the problems of friendships in college, let's talk about the 3 types of friendships that we can be seeking and which one is the most powerful. Obviously, these are generalities. They all connect. But there is one that I think is the most powerful friendship to form while you're in college. Those 3 types are friendships of pleasure, friendships of competence, and friends of character. Friends of pleasure, people you hang out with because they're really fun to hang out with. It's a good time. Friends of competence, people you hang out with because they're really good at something, right? You transactionally exchange things. A friend that you have for a class, for example, like a group project, or professor friend that you're really good at doing research with if you're a professor. Finally, the last type, and in my opinion, the most powerful to be building, is friendships of character. These are friends that you are friends with because you revel, you aspire, you love the character of that person. Think about how radical that is. You don't love them because they're interesting, or because they have the same values as you, or because they have lots of drive. These could be parts of what you love about their character, but it is not the main thing that you're talking about when you think of their character. You don't love them because they're physically proximate to you, or because they have the same interests, or because they're fun to be around. Even because you can be yourself around them. Of course, hopefully you can be yourself around them, but that's not the root of what we should be looking for in a friendship of character. What is the root? And as I explain this, I'm going to talk shout out of my best friend, John, for every single one of these. He has his own YouTube channel, John Maverick. We've been business partners for 4 years. Lovely guy. Literally never had an argument with him in my life. He's basically like the Filipino version of me, and then more introspective somehow, and calm, because I'm always energetic. So Yeah, let's go through the principles of a friendship of character and use John as an example. Friendships of character aspire you to grow to better versions of yourself. Man, if I could talk about all the ways John makes me want to do this, we would be here for a third part, which we might actually be because of how long this already is. So, what does John make me aspire to be? I'm almost going to bring a tear to my eye, actually. He makes me aspire to learn how to have leisure for the sake of having leisure. To this day, I still struggle to just play video games or read a book of fiction just because, with nothing else, no other explicit reason. I'm still a little bit productivity oriented. How else would I be able to record 3 goddamn hour videos for Conscious College if I didn't have some degree of that? He is so good at asking questions. I swear to God, sometimes he must think about these beforehand, and then he gives them to me on call, because some of the questions he asks me are just cutthroat, dead, immediately grabs my heart tendrils. It's crazy. He is so incredibly focused and deep work. Like he works so much for Morgan, the productivity company he's at, and he's just able to just do it for hours a day in a row, which I'm also aspiring to be able to do. I'm generally quite good at deep work, but he does it on another level. He's also so introspective. I'm very introspective too, but he also does daily, weekly, quarterly, monthly, yearly reviews, journaling all the time, writing. It's very inspiring for me. So that's the first thing. People who aspire you to make you be better in the friendship of character. People who question your bullshit. And John has done this so many times, it's honestly too much to count. I think the most prominent case was my 4th relationship. I've been in 4 so far, all profound for different reasons. I was friends with them for 3 years and realized I loved them 2 months before visiting them. And the entire time leading up to it, I was like, nope, can't do this. Can't tell them that I love them. Until about a few days beforehand, my brother said something really cryptic. He's also another friendship of character. He was like, we always regret the things that we don't do more than what we did. And then as he said this, he took a Scrabble block and he just placed it down in a really dramatic fashion on the Scrabble table. Not Scrabble, I meant to say Blookus. Blookus. Great Dutch game. So I was like, oh great, okay, fine. I'll tell them. And then I don't know how this happened. It was like cosmic bad luck. Genuinely the most ridiculous situation ever. I'll have to give a whole, with their permission, of course, video about this journey to getting in a relationship with them, because it was truly ridiculous. Maybe I'll talk more about it in romantic relationships video. They sent me a video titled, When You're Hopelessly in Love with Your Female Friend. And the whole video was basically an encapsulation of this guy who was friends with this girl finally confessing his love to her, and then her gaslighting him into admitting, lying that he wasn't actually in love with her. That was devastating for me to see before going, as you can imagine. So I was like, all right, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to tell them. And then John came in, my guardian angel, and he whacked me across the face, not physically, metaphorically, on online call, with the same question basically that my brother said, but in a different way worded. And I did. I ended up doing it. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that happened in there, but we did end up being in a relationship for a while. The most profound one I've been in. Many problems still, but very profound, very growth oriented. And it's all happened because I had a friend who questioned my bullshit, who wasn't afraid to sacrifice potentially short-term love in the friendship for long-term love. You need friends who can do that. What's the third quality of friendship's character? People who are very different from you. And this is why I didn't want to say your friend should have the same values. Your friend should have the same interests. That does not push you out of your comfort zone. Yes, it's good to have those. But if we really want to grow in college, on all the other principles that we mentioned, we can't be staying in our comfort zone the whole time. And one of the best ways to step out is to have friendships who are super different from you. John is very introverted. I'm super extroverted, as you might be able to tell. Although I'm becoming more introverted now, honestly. I love talking to people. I'm more so comfortable with myself at this point in my life, though, that I just don't feel the need to interact as often. John is incredibly work focused, whereas I'm a little more relationship focused now. I used to be more, but I'm actually more in a career phase now with Conscious College and Octalysis. So that's gotten less, but still a huge difference between us. He's also so able to just relax, as I was saying earlier. Like, he can just watch videos, play video games, watch anime, just on his own time, and I still struggle to do that a lot of the time. He's into different hobbies as me. He's a computer scientist, a software developer, which I don't even know how to type a single line of code. I did one class of AP computer science in high school, and that was it. So we're very different. Very, very different. Next aspect of a friendship of character is friends who don't clip your wings. I want you to imagine every single person has a pair of wings, and those wings are defined by their authentic, inherent characteristics of their self. I don't mean that you can't change as a person. I mean, like, what makes you you, really to your core. For me, that is deep philosophical introspection, deep want to change the world in a good way, deep want to build a focus deeply many times throughout the day. I could go on and on and on about stuff like that, but think about what your wings are. Friendships of character do not clip your wings. They do not clip them because they do not want to force you into a mold just to be with them. They, going back to the love in part 1, they want you to grow into the best, most authentic version of yourself. And so they won't clip your wings, like for me, destroying my ability to do deep work or not being philosophical and introspective with me, because they know that's a core part of who I am. Of course, I'm not saying everyone needs to be like that. You know, you don't always need to be philosophical and introspective. But if you're going to be a deep friend with me, yeah, you do. You do. And trying not to do that means that we'll probably drift apart. And if you try and force me not to be like that, then you're clipping my wings. And friendships of character don't do that. Friends of character share their colors with you. Remember the paint metaphor that we used for love? Of each person is their own canvas with their own colors, and you share your colors with other people so they can see deeper into you, and you can see deeper into them, and you can see deeper into yourself and the world. Friendships of character really make an explicit attempt to help you see the world from their perspective and all the ways that they find things relevant and the values they have, because they know that at its core, that is one of the major things that makes life beautiful, is being able to witness the world through someone else, to get a momentary glimpse into the infinite. The infinite in the sense that every other person around you has such a vastly different way of relating to the world than you do, even if they have the same values and whatnot. Just go on a walk with one of your friends and just have a conversation with them about pointing out what is relevant to them as you're walking. You will be astounded at how different how you find relevance is. It is truly beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Friendships of character give their resonance, well, not give their resonance, but this is an equation that I should share about how you can tell what a good friendship of character is coming, is one of the things, which is a combination of resonance, time, and commitment. So remember, I said the first parts of what we value in a friendship aren't entirely bad, and this is where that comes back, because resonance is an aspect of a friendship of character. You should feel when you're with them that you're like, resonating a bit, right? Like a tuning fork. That might come with what's your chemistry like, how humorous can you be around each other, How much time do they give you? How much energy are they investing in you? Attention, awareness when you're together. John does all of these things. How much commitment do you have with each other? We resonate deeply whenever we call. I literally never had a bad conversation with that guy. We have such a profound amount of time we spend together, probably 2 to 3 days a week for an hour and a half, even though it's completely online. I've seen him in person once. That's how good friends we are. And we've known each other for almost 3 years, probably a little more than that at this point. Also, huge commitment. We've both admitted. I've told him he's my best friend. Like, just full stop. I mean, I'm really good friends with my brother. I'm really good friends with some other people in my life. But John is my best friend. And I'm very proud to say that, because what better friend could I have? I don't think I could. John, if you're watching this, hi. People, another aspect of friendships of character, people who give you energy when you're around them. I think one of the terms that I like to use, which is a little mean, but it kind of highlights this point well, is when you hang out with someone, are they a vampire? And by that I mean, when you exit the interaction with them, do they suck your energy or do they give you energy? I know it sounds cruel, but it's important. Like, you know, if you're consistently hanging out with someone and you notice every single time that they're sucking your energy instead of giving you, it is, again, as we said earlier, actually selfish to keep hanging out with them, because you are hurting all of your other relationships, yourself and society, by continuing to invest in this person. Maybe you can help navigate them if you have a strong enough friendship and you really want to invest in trying to help them get better, go for it. But that doesn't mean you have to do it all the time, right? Next, people who have their shit together. And I don't want to come across as really condescending again. When I say they have their stuff together, I don't mean they need to have every single part of their life figured out. They're fully self-actualized. They've got all the self-regulatory habits. They followed every single thing in my videos to a T. No. I just mean they're not like flying off the seat of their pants. They should have a decent sleep schedule, try and have a decent exercise schedule, a decent diet, right? Not perfect, but all of these things severely affect their relationship with you. As we talked about with self-regulation earlier, this affects all of your life. It's completely holistic. So having John he has a decent diet, good sleep schedule, consistent, good exercise routine. He goes rock climbing, does the gym every now and then, right? He's really, really good career job right now at Morgan. Like, he's got his stuff together, right? When I'm around him, I feel inspired to keep pursuing my own things. Another thing of friendships of character is people who will be honest about their relationship with you. Going back to the what's selfish versus selfless in a relationship. It is selfish to not be honest with someone about what place they have in your friendship hierarchy. I'm not saying you have to rigidly hierarchically categorize what every single one of your friendships is, and that's really that's a problem in itself, because it's really impossible to quantify love completely. You can quantify it with some metrics, like, you know, if two people got in a car accident and were at separate hospitals, who are you going to see? That's kind of artificial. So good friendships of character are honest with each other about what place they have in each other's life. If they're not best friends, they will, if that comes up, tell them, and they won't pretend otherwise, because that is avoiding that intimacy and truly caring for the other person. You're leading them on if you're not honest about that. The second to last thing of a friendship of character is they draw out parts of you which you didn't even know existed. You feel so incredibly resonant with them and strongly about them that they push you to aspire in ways you didn't even know you could. I've mentioned a little bit how John did that earlier, but again, like, he could put me more into the content creator space and business and entrepreneurial mindset than before, because he already had a really good YouTube channel when I met him, and I just fully went in. I didn't even know that I had it in me, but by interacting with him, I got even more inspired. And the last thing about friendships of character is they're people who will do acts of service for you. You know, the people who will help you when you're drunk and need someone to be around you, who will help you when you just got broken up with, who will drive you to the airport at 3 a.m. Those are the really good friendships of character. Now, it's a little harder to do that with John because, you know, he is literally in Canada, super far away from me, but he's still done acts of service for me, like make little fun birthday celebration stuff, help me when I'm going through an emotional experience with relationships, particularly. So he does all of those things. So those are what conscious relationships look like. Now that we've talked about that, there's just 3 things that I want you to think about in regards to everything I just said, which are 3 options for integrating this knowledge about conscious friendships going forward. The first is build your relationship with yourself. And as I mentioned, you should have the most profound friendship with you. Don't let it be with John, even though as much as I love him, the first most incredible relationship you should have is with yourself. And it's not selfish to do that. In fact, it's selfish not to do that because it will affect every single one of your other relationships to not have a good relationship with yourself. The second thing that you can do with this knowledge is build deeper friendships with those you're already friends with. I would recommend if you do this, you think about how to do it in a very mindful way, because from my experience and also from yours, telling someone what to do, like, hey, you should do this more to build our friendship, often is met with resistance because you're not respecting their sovereignty, going back to the love point from earlier. What we need to do instead is have a conversation with them about, in a positively framed way, how much you appreciate the friendship and how you want to build it even deeper. And dialogue with them about how you might be able to do that. Now we don't have a forcing of anything. They feel resonant and excited because they can come up with a solution with you for how to build a deeper friendship. That's the way to do it. Unfortunately, the last option, which might be what you have to do if you go through this transformational conflict that I was talking about, you might have to let go of old friends. That's really tough to admit, but it's true. Sometimes things don't click. Sometimes you grow so much that you outgrow the people you've been around. And it's really hard to accept that, I know, but it is, again, being selfish to not let go. Clinging to them to survive that past identity that you had, which is now long gone, is only hurting both of you. Sometimes you just got to cut it off. Which doesn't have to be a complete cutting off. You might still see them every now and then. But you're going to have to do this with relationships. You're going to have to do this with habits. You're going to have to do this with goals if you're really serious about the work. And trust me, it will help you in every single other relationship that you still have in your life. All right, the 7th and final principle of the second part of what you should really be seeking in college. Are you ready? This is a huge one as well. And that is seeking to instill a degree of subject matter knowledge. That's right. We can't all be in spiritual fairyland. We're also going to be really learning from the subjects that we're diving into, which you'll be happy to hear, especially if you're a professor. But that does not mean that there aren't things that we can do inside of this in order to improve how this connects to the spiritual practice in the rest of this video, because ultimately everything is connected to that. In order to see how, I want to ask you a question. You can answer this better if you're a student, but as a professor, also answer it, which is, how much of your class material from high school do you remember? The odds are not very much. And the reason, aside from time, I would assume is, in general, this might not be the case for you, but there was not effective teaching or learning done inside of that environment for you still to remember it to this day, to have it changed you profoundly to this day. There's a thought experiment you can use in order to understand what I'm getting at here. I want you to imagine that you're building a beautiful ship, and you get so enamored with building this ship in as beautiful a way as possible. You get colored boards, painting them red, blue, gold, deck out the ship with the greatest gold ornaments, a lion in the front, or a butterfly, or a dragon, or a fairy, whatever you want. You spend years building this ship as grandiose and large and good-looking as possible. And then, when it's finally time to set sail, everyone gets around. They're watching the ship about to let its sails loose. And as soon as it gets even a bit into the water, it immediately sinks. You probably see where that was going. What I want you to take from this thought experiment is that the foundation of anything is incredibly important. And when it comes to teaching and learning, oftentimes we think that we have the foundation down when we really don't. I want to be really careful here not to sound overly self-righteous, especially in regards to professors, because I have much more authority to talk about students when it comes to this subject and learning, as I just went through 4 years of college experience. So let me first orient to the student side. Just went through that. I've experienced all that. I did a whole bunch of learning into the science of meta learning itself. I've made courses on learning. I have a course called Obsidian University, helping students note take and learn inside of school. The Art of Linked Reading, the Self-Learning Quest is a course that I've made. So I've done a lot in meta learning. I also told you about my theory of learning, spiral knowing, which, not as a brag, I just think it's true. It's the best learning theory I've found out there. Better than Bloom's taxonomy, better than universal design for learning, better than flow theory. It integrates all of them. As for teaching, I've done lots of teaching in my life, oriented towards over 10,000 students in podcasting, blogging, creating on YouTube, taught over 4 video courses, hundreds of students online. I've also in person taught hundreds of students in Cornell Outdoor Education, as well as in my education classes at Cornell. High schoolers, college students, adults. As I said in the very beginning of part 1, hilariously, the one place I haven't taught as much is the college classroom. I hope to be able to teach there one day. It would be absolutely amazing. I don't want to have to get a PhD in order to do that. But the point I'm trying to make is all of the advice that I'm going to give and illuminating of the problems, particularly, firstly, is going to be oriented a lot towards students. But the stuff I do orient towards professors, I'm going to highlight mostly the problems, not necessarily the solutions. And I really want you to contemplate on your own, if you're a professor, what it is that I'm highlighting about these problems. I do think a lot of my solutions would be really good. I am not going to be arrogant enough to say 100% that they would be, because I haven't experimented with them myself. I've seen them work from other professors and conversations, but keep that in mind with everything that I say going forward. So, with that being said, there are 2 main problems of learning in college right now. One is that we're not teaching and learning as well as we could be. And the second is that we're not teaching the right things. So let's handle each of those in turn. Let's start with learning, which is more from the student perspective. What are the problems of learning? Shallow spiral knowing. We've talked about this in droves already, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. But in general, students need to be going deeper in spiral knowing themselves and really seeking to know on that deep level. There's too much cramming. I often, when I go to the cocktail lounge at Cornell, I literally see students, especially during final season, sleeping during finals week in the cocktail lounge itself because they're cramming so hard for all the exams coming up. And while this is an effective short-term solution to learning on exams, I really want you to zoom out if you're a student and see how this is affecting your learning long-term. Because I think one of the reasons this problem continues to be such a prevalent thing is that students don't see how pervasively bad this is in their life. You see, when you cram, you essentially memorize that information for 1 or 2 days. And then once the test's over, I'm sure you've felt the experience of just forgetting everything. Now, that's easy to validate on like a week by week basis. But here's the thing, and this is a question I want you to ask in more of your life in general too. How does this affect your life 5 years from now or 10 years from now if you keep doing this? The answer is, you keep cramming for every single exam, you are basically destroying your ability to genuinely learn anything over the long term. Sure, you might have some stuff that you keep from semester to semester, but it's mostly the stuff that you need to keep going from semester to semester, which isn't always the case. You're relying on the next professor to require you to have known some of the stuff from the previous semester, which is not a situation you want to be in. It is getting hot, so let me turn the fan on. All right, I'm back. Now, that's a huge issue, and it's a big problem of learning in college. Again, I'm not going to go into all the ways to fix this right now, but that's one of the big problems. Another problem is there's too little spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is the intermittent recalling of information that you need in progressively longer intervals. The reason this is effective is because one of the ways that you can remember things better is by recalling them multiple times over a period of time. Once you've learned something for the first time, it seems like it's in your memory, like it's really concretely in there. But 2 days later, you try and recall it again, it's way harder. And it's that effort of recalling it again that embeds it farther. You might not believe this, but some students that I've met, even at elite colleges, they actually don't realize that effort and learning are completely correlated. They think when you're effectively learning, it's easy, it's seamless. It's like, wow, I found the right technique, now it's easy. No, that actually is a very good sign that you're not learning. If things are too easy, it's because you're not putting yourself in a challenging enough situation to deeply learn the material. And I see people studying at Cornell all the time off of the slides. Like they'll just read the slides, which is a very effective short-term technique. That's why people do it. Awful for long-term retention because there's no recalling. In the spiral knowing remembering band, there's a difference between recognizing and recalling. Recognizing is just seeing something and saying, yes, I know what that is. Recalling is coming up with it on your own without any cues. That is way harder and much more effective for learning in general. There's also too little interleaving. Interleaving is the art of bringing together various parts of what you're learning at the same time when you're studying. So for example, let's say that you're studying for a calculus exam. Instead of doing derivatives on its own and just studying that a whole bunch, do a mix of derivatives and integrals at the same time. Do a derivative problem, then do an integral problem, then do whatever else. And the reason this is so effective is because it's actually how you're going to get the learning on the exam. The studying on the problems on the exam are not going to be, here's all the derivative questions, here's all the integral. No, they're going to mix them up. And that's also what real life is going to be like. You're not going to have it all at once. Interleaving is really effective for learning more effectively because of that. Another problem is there's no opportunity for retaking tests, and therefore learning is not as incentivized as it could be over the long run, because students feel, well, if the first test that I take is the only one that matters, that's the only one I'm going to care about, and I have no real incentive to integrate the feedback from the grade of that test, which will probably come 3 weeks later, because it's already too far gone, and I won't be able to retake it anyway. And there's an opportunity that we're missing out on here. If there was retakes of tests, a second, one retake at least, and students could get motivated to integrate all that feedback from that first exam that they took and actually learn the material better. I'm going to have a whole separate video about grades and education because it's such a rabbit hole that I could go into. So we're going to leave it at that. Often theory and practice are disconnected. I talked about this in my strategic thinking class earlier, where the game theory that we were learning in class just didn't feel like it was connecting to my real life experience. We've talked about that. So let's go on to the next one, which is students' notes are siloed. You've probably noticed, or you've done it yourself, where when you take notes, you tend to have a note for one class in one notebook. Maybe you have separate notebooks for different classes, whether physical or digital, and rarely do they connect together. But as we know from the first part, everything's connected. So not connecting these notes together, it might seem practical because they're different classes. You don't want to mix up the notes of these classes. But I've created many videos on note-taking, actually, on connecting those. I used to be in the PCAM community, personal knowledge management, all about talking regarding Obsidian and link-based note-taking, connecting notes between classes. So I'm not going to go deep here, but this siloing of your notes isn't just a note-taking problem, it's a thinking problem. It teaches you to think of your classes as separate instead of fundamentally collected, like we know all the geniuses of history with their interconnected knowledge would do. There is little difficulty personalization and no Goldilocks zone or flow because of that. Flow theory is a whole theory made by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which describes the feeling of utter presentness and fulfillment when we are completely and utterly absorbed in the activity that we're doing. There's a lot that goes into how flow happens. I'm sure you felt it before, but the main thing that you need to know regarding flow, kind of rhymed, is you ideally want to be in your Goldilocks zone, which is the zone in which your challenge of the activity and your skill level are in balance. The problem is a lot of classes, because they're so big or there's not an attempt to do this, do not personalize difficulty to you, or you don't personalize difficulty to it, even if it doesn't. And this makes it really hard to enter in flow, where you'll be doing homework for it. Part of it is also a mindset problem of when you come to it, you think, I've seen a lot of students who go on their phone all the time while doing homework. Like they'll do some homework for 10 minutes and then they'll check a message on their phone and they'll do some homework for 10 minutes. And this kind of leads to the next point of the problems of learning, which is deep work is dead. Deep work is talked about by Cal Newport in his book. You're never going to believe what the name is. You ready? The name of the book is Deep Work. I know. Genius. Should get a title award. This deep work is all about the immersion of one single-minded focused activity for hours on end. For the most part, this type of work is gone. It's not for me because I've realized the value of it early on in college, and I started getting really adamant about spending mornings really, really absorbed in something and then having my afternoons and evenings more free. And that was incredible because once you build up this muscle, it is a muscle, then you are unstoppable. You can get more done in an hour and a half than what some people do in an entire day or two. It's crazy how powerful this ability is. And this will help you learn so much more effectively. Imagine if your issue of busyness in college was not how much work you had, but rather how you were coming to the work, how you were relating to it. That would be powerful. I'm not saying that you have to work for hours and hours and hours at a time like I did in the morning when I was a student. I know a lot of friends who have a little bit more ADHD problems, focus issues, and they genuinely have like a chemical thing causing this instead of because they've created this focusing muscle themselves through watching too much short form or whatnot. And for them, it's a little bit harder to follow this advice. There is too much to say about that to go deeply into how to integrate that for them. But know that there's a lot of different manifestations of deep work. Overall, the problem is that there's not enough focus in learning. That's universal. Another issue is students don't know how to self-learn. This was a big one when I was in college because I think there's this expectation some students have, even unconsciously, that their classes will teach them everything that they need to know for the exam. And time again, I heard the complaint, oh, what was on the exam wasn't what was taught. Or I wasn't prepared for this part of college because it wasn't taught to me. And I understand those concerns. It's frustrating when you do all this studying and then you end up getting an exam that doesn't follow what it is that you studied. That's really annoying. But we have to take responsibility for this issue ourselves, because otherwise we give away the control to the external world, which is a losing game every time. And the solution is self-learning. Self-learning not just for your classes, but also for anything in general. In fact, literally everything practically that I'm telling you right now, I had to self-learn because this isn't taught in college, which is what we'll get to later on. So it's almost it's a necessity to know how to self-learn at this point, because the stuff that is most valuable for learning is not going to be taught to you in college. You need to do it on your own. Another problem is students don't know how to read. Now, I know that sounds really mean, and I'm not saying you literally cannot read when you open up a book, like, oh, I can't even read the words. That's not what I mean. Students can do that. What I mean is they don't know how to do the higher levels of reading. Maybe. I'm not saying this is you. There's 4 different levels of reading, all of which I talk about in my course, The Art of Linked Reading. The first one is elementary reading, which is knowing what the words mean. Everyone knows how to do that. It's the next 3 levels that most people don't do. First is inspectional reading, which is the skill of inspecting a text beforehand to get the scaffold and map of what it's about. Level 3 is analytical reading, which is the skill of, now that you've inspected it, really diving into each part of that book and understanding it in its own as much as you can. What is the author trying to say in whole and in part? How are their arguments structured in order to say that? What are the individual arguments that they have in each chapter, in each paragraph, in each sentence? Finally, we have syntopical reading, which is reading to connect multiple different books in conversation, to put them in conversation. That is the most incredible level of reading, because this is where you start getting emergence happening, when different authors start talking to each other and coming to insights that aren't in any one of the books on themselves. Most students, even I a lot of the time, don't do this because it's so hard. You have to align terms between authors. There's often words that are the same in both books, but you need to align the definitions. Learning, for example, could be in 2 different learning books, and yet they're both defined in different terms. So it's really hard to do, but it's so powerful if you do it right. Another issue is that students don't realize that they can create their own groupings and label for things. We don't have to use what the teacher gives us. We can make our own. In fact, I encourage you to. That's a whole about analytical arc of knowing inside of Spiral Knowing is creating our own groupings, our own language, our own whatever, because everyone's mind works differently, and doing that is going to help you learn it so much better than just taking what the professor gives. And finally, we don't think systematically or holistically enough. This connects to everything else I said. We don't connect our notes together. We don't see how the disciplines actually connect, how it connects to our personal lives, how our personal lives connect to school, all of that. It's not connected enough. So those are some of the biggest problems with learning. Now let's move on to the problems of teaching in college right now. And we're going to focus on both STEM and humanities. First, we're just going to do both of them. I think most of these apply to both STEM and humanities. Man, water tastes so good, especially when you drink it out of a fish cup. I'm so silly. The first major issue is that lectures are too long and information ridden. Now, I'm not saying that lectures aren't valuable. I used to demonize them when I was less evolved in my thinking around teaching and learning. What I was really demonizing was the type of lecture I'm talking about, which is something you've probably experienced. Professor drones on and on and on. There's so many slides. They just keep rushing through. You can barely keep up with the notes. It's so fast. That is the bad form of lecture. And the reason is it's a misunderstanding of what the value of a lecture is. Lectures are not useful for information transfer. There's so many other modes of learning that are way more effective. We can't actually listen to information that fast. We can read way faster than we can listen to information. People would learn what you do in a lecture way faster if it was just as a book instead of as a lecture itself. The reason that lectures survive as they do is because they're incredibly practical for getting students to come to class, right? A lot of professors fear, well, if I didn't have the lecture, maybe students wouldn't consume the information. Or this is just how things are done. And so by having the lecture, I get students to come, and then they slap a participation grade on it to make sure the students come as well. Well, if the students aren't coming to lecture, it might say something about the lecture itself and how engaging it is. And I'm not saying that your class fits into this, but I want to encourage you to broaden your view of what lecture might be valuable for. Lectures should not be for knowledge transfer. If you're going to do a lecture for knowledge transfer, do a flipped classroom, or think about doing a flipped classroom, which is what we'll talk about later on. Lectures are fundamentally about building a participatory knowing with the students as they're experiencing the class. This goes to the participatory band inside of Spiral Knowing. Why is this the case, and why is lecture so valuable for that? Well, think about it. Lecture, you're in person, you're talking to the students, you have visuals in the back. You're the professor, you've got this authority relationship with the students, and you have the ability to make them interact with each other during lecture if you wanted, with discussions or clickers of some sort. You have such an incredible opportunity to enliven the entire class about the idea that you're talking about through the lecture. And that will inspire them to really try on the homework outside of class. They'll be so excited for it because you've built that participatory relationship for them and the knowledge. That is what lectures are really powerful for. So if you're a great lecturer, keep doing it. But if your lectures are mostly the type that I was just saying, then I would highly encourage you to consider, why are you lecturing? Is it because you genuinely think it's a great tool, or is it because that's just the way things have always been done? The second major problem with teaching is there's not enough storytelling or emotionality. And I know what you might say, which is, well, we're here to teach content, not storytelling or emotions. But emotions are the glue that make the content stick. It's not a distraction from what you're teaching. It is the teaching. The memories that I have the most from college, the learnings that stick with me the most, are the ones where the professors really tried to add emotions into what we were teaching. Or stories. One of the best examples, I remember my Better Decisions professor was doing a whole class about romantic relationships and how to make better decisions in those. And at the beginning of class, he took a chair, walked up to the front of the stage, plopped it down, sat in it, paused for like 10 seconds, and then he said, "You might be wondering, why am I the person to talk about romantic relationships for college students? Well, I have been divorced 4 times." And therefore, I know everything not to do for romantic relationships. Let me tell you, the class was gripped on that professor for the entire period. It's because he set up the lecture with some emotion, with some storytelling in order to get us connected. Another issue is problems aren't connected to real-world events or students' current lives or motivation. This gets us to stick the learnings into what's relevant at our current lives and moment. Emotions also stick learnings, but relevancy is another thing that makes it stick. If we don't see the practicality, the context, the use case, the learning just drifts away. It's not connected to anything. Material is sometimes not connected to each other throughout the semester. This actually, one of the funny things about students learning, as I said earlier, is that they don't keep learning the material after the test to keep remembering it, but they wouldn't have to do that if the material was connected in the first place throughout the semester by the professor. So, for example, one thing that would be super useful is, let's say that you're learning integrals and derivatives in calculus. Once you learn one of those, keep making students use what they learned about one of those when they start learning the other thing. And that way, it might seem like a waste of time, like, oh, we're distracting from whatever it is that we're learning now, integrals. No, you are making it so much easier for the students to study effectively and teaching them really good studying habits when you do it like this, because now they don't even have to study as much. They're just continuing to integrate and integrate and integrate everything as stuff goes on. As I said earlier, tests aren't allowed to be retaken to improve grades. There's little personalization to the individual student. I'm going to skip by anything that I've talked about a lot. Teaching isn't connected to other classes or material. Here's a big one. Don't see the power in having a discussion talking about students' purpose or other parts of this list. Now, if you've gotten this far in the series, I think you might see what the value in doing that is. I'm not saying you need to turn your entire class into Conscious College. All you're going to do is watch my videos. That's it. There's nothing else. If your class is calculus, screw calculus. It's just going to be Conscious College. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is having even small moments of doing that throughout the semester plants the seed in your students' mind that these are valuable things to be doing. And therefore, they'll start doing it in their own lives. They'll start seeing the world, relating to it, participatory knowing in that way. You are the linchpin to getting them to actionalize everything in this video. We also have a problem of not creating a growth mindset culture. Talked about that. Not arguing from first principles enough. Non-first principles are when we find something in deductive reasoning, for example. Deductive reasoning is taking a preordained theory and then using it to analyze the world. So a classic example of where this fell really wrong is in classic economics, where we took this theory of Homo economicus, someone that's just super rational, hyper rational, always looking at the world through utils. And when you deductively reason, the world's going to look like your theory, unless it's completely out of whack. So for a while, we took this theory when it was, as we know now from behavioral economics, completely wrong. That's the issue with deductive reasoning. Obviously, we don't throw away all deductive reasoning. It's necessary because if we had to inductively reason everything, we would just die. It would be way too much effort. But that leads us to the second thing, which is we need to talk more about inductive reasoning, reasoning from first principles, which is taking raw experience or data and then drawing principles / theories out of that. And the value of this is that you don't run as much into the danger of slapping a theory on something and just acting as if that is the case and being blinded by the theory that you're using. Inductive reasoning has its problems too. The main one is overgeneralization, where you take something from a small context, try and generalize it out, and because that small context doesn't apply to the greater context, it no longer generalizes. So highlight that as well. But generally, we're arguing too much from deductive reasoning and not enough from inductive. And we don't teach students to think inductively or to, going back to structure and content, relate to what we're telling them in a questioning manner instead of just taking it for granted. Even in physics, where things seem so certain, you should still be doing this. Still get students to question, because we've seen every single time we've believed we've got it. We have the physics theory. It gets changed. And that's going to keep happening. So we should teach our students to be able to relate to stuff in that way. Similarly, we do too much top-down thinking and not enough bottom-up thinking as teachers. Top-down thinking is looking from the top down in regards to our study. So when we talk to students, here's the outline of our discipline. This is how it's structured. This is the way it's structured. Bottom-up thinking is really narrowly going into a concept and then connecting concepts together on a bottom-up scale and then creating structure out of that. Both types of thinking, super valuable. Want to do them at different times and mix between them. Generally, though, we don't teach students enough that they can do the bottom-up thinking themselves. Like, they don't have to take the structure we give them. If the structure we give them isn't helpful to them, why are they using it? Like, they should create their own structure, hopefully not completely destroying the one that we have for our discipline until it's unrecognizable, but something that not only makes them understand better, but also might lead to new insights because they're practicing this now. And 5 years down the road, hopefully they'll be the next Einstein. I don't know if you're optimistic. So that's another issue. Professors over-prioritize propositional knowing. I think we've talked about that. Here's a new one, which is classes aren't flipped. A flipped classroom is where the first interaction with new concepts happens outside of class rather than in class. Before I say anything else, I want to emphasize, I'm not saying the solution is we should flip every class. No, it's really up to the individual professor to figure out what teaching style resonates with them, what works for them. I want to give you the argument for why flipping the class might be helpful. The reason is, when you put first interaction with concepts outside of class, that leaves more in-class time to do some of the deeper parts of spiral knowing. When the students have already grappled with the ideas first themselves, this is when all the students are there in person, the professor's there, the TAs are there. It's the perfect time for them to do the deeper parts of spiral knowing. You may think your best use as a professor is in explaining the concepts yourself. You still can do that in a flipped classroom. You can record the lecture, put it online, students see it. The value is now you make yourself even more valuable when you're in the class and you can go around, help the students with their various things, and answer much deeper questions than when you're in a lecture hall and you can't answer these questions because if you did, you'd run out of time for the lecture. So a whole bunch more I could say about that. I'll make a video about flipped classrooms in the future, but let's leave it there. Another issue is there's no feedback asked by the professor about the class itself. I think a lot of this has to do with feeling scared of what the students will say. And that's perfectly valid. I can resonate with that. Another issue is the standard for class feedback right now is you just get it at the very end of the semester and that's it. And that's the worst time to be getting feedback because you can't integrate it into the class itself. So what we really need is more feedback during the semester when students are exiting class, for example. You might give a 5-minute exit card where they write down some feedback 2 weeks in, and then you assemble all of that. Now you have super valuable feedback for what people are struggling with or how they're feeling about the class. And do this multiple times, and you'll have such a better class by the end. Your professor, rate my professor score, is going to be 6 out of 5. Not even 5 out of 5. You're that good. Oh, here's a huge one. This one's I'm really passionate about, which is AI isn't allowed or not taught how to use well in a lot of classes. If you're not teaching your students or not allowing AI in your classes, I'm sorry. At this point, that is inexcusable. And I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, Aiden, AI lets them offload the learning to the AI itself instead of them learning on their own. Yes, that is true. A lot of students are using AI in that way. But we need to be careful not to get angry about AI and teaching and learning because of the way it's implemented now, rather than the first principles of what an AI could be used for in regards to learning. Again, it was just introduced a few years ago. So of course, people aren't going to have as good of an understanding about how to use it as they might if they were taught how to, if they were allowed to use it more in class. I want to give you some ideas for the power of AI, just so you might be able to see what it is that I'm talking about in regards to teaching. One is AI can personalize examples and tutoring for each student. One of the major problems we've been talking about through all these videos is how hard it is to personalize learning because of how big classes are, time limitations on the professor. The AI is like your personal tutoring god. It can personalize to the students' interests, their values, what other courses they've taken, their personal lives. It's incredible. And it can personalize the difficulty of what it gives to the students as well. It can help scaffold students' learning so it can try and keep them in their Goldilocks zone. It can push them into deeper forms of spiral knowing. If you train the AI to get them to think deeper instead of just giving them the answer, we solve a lot of the problems with how students are using it right now. Because students can use any AI they want, and it's not regulated by the class, they do exactly what you'd expect them to. They take the path of least resistance and they ask the AI, how do I do this problem? And the AI is not trained as a Socratic dialoguer to get them deeper into spiral knowing. But here's the kicker. If you did train it and then you gave the class your own AI training, like description, or you got it from somewhere else, I think I'll make one in the future when I make my whole video about AI and how to integrate it into the classroom. Now you have this incredible, deeper spiral knowing tutor that can also be an incredible teaching assistant. Imagine the power of having an AI summarize problems that the general students are experiencing in regards to your course based off of the individual uses of the AI by the students. That's so valuable. Also with cheating, if a student does an essay, for example, require them to submit a photo of what they use the AI for, with the AI telling it how it was used in the essay process, and ensure that they didn't do the whole thing with the AI. Now, of course, students can always cheat. They can always edit it in Photoshop. That's their choice. You're never going to be able to avoid that. This makes that a little harder to do. So those are just some ideas for how AI can be used in class. I could go on and on and on and on, but they need to be learning this stuff in college. I'm in the workforce right now. Do you know how my boss speaks to me about AI? He says, if you're not using AI, you're absolutely irrelevant. And I get it. I'm vegan. I know all the environmental problems, the whatnot, The issues with funding these big tech billionaires, absolutely. The unfortunate reality is that AI is not going to go away, and sometimes you have to work in a system in order to be able to change it. AI is too powerful to ignore. You cannot fight against AI by completely not using it. It's just putting you too much of a disadvantage compared to other students. Another issue is there's no scaffolding for emotional regulation inside of the classes. We've talked about that. We're not pushed to explore outside of the material. We don't follow, here's a new one. We don't follow universal design for learning principles all the time. For those who don't know, universal design for learning is a theory to try and make class learning more universally applicable to people. And you do that by having multiple ways of engaging with the material, different purposes for going in, different ways of starting to get integrated into the material, different modes of expression. You might have content shown visually and audio and also through text. And you also have different ways of engagement. You could do a project or an essay or a problem set or a discussion or a video, right? All these different ways that you can engage in the material. That's another issue with teaching. We've talked about this one, focus on content, not the structure of knowing. I did want to mention some unique humanities problems as we rile up the end of this video. I'm specifically focusing on humanities because that's a lot of where I've spent my education. I've done huge amounts of reading and talking into STEM as well, but there's some unique humanities problems which I felt passionate enough to bring up, which is, one, professors don't let students come to discussion insights on their own. Some professors, I should specify. And I'll give an example, which is I heard of a friend who took a happiness class at college, and one of the first days that he came in, the happiness professor started a discussion and immediately revealed the insight that he wanted the students to have about happiness, which is, let go more. And the issue with that is, as profound as that insight is, letting go, when you immediately reveal the insight at the beginning of the discussion, it loses all the power of the student coming to it itself. There's a quote that I really like, which is, a man convinced against their will is of the, a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. And it really rings true for discussions, which is there's this careful, delicate relationship that you have to have as a professor with the students, where you want to guide them towards the profound insight that you want, while also letting them come to it themselves to get the emotional attachment and the wow factor, the memorableness of that insight, while also being open to them coming to new insights which you didn't even expect in the discussion. And those are some of the most beautiful moments as a professor, is when the students say something that is so completely novel, out of whack, you didn't even think that it was possible. That is powerful. Another issue is the opposite problem, which is sometimes discussions aren't structured enough. They're sort of airy-fairy. I've experienced this a lot, where you sit in a discussion, it's very obvious the professor has planned nothing, and they start with one broad question at the beginning of class. The students aren't that engaged because the professor isn't that engaged, and it just kind of dies, and it's kind of sucked of soul throughout the whole time. And the last unique humanities problem that, there's more, but we're focusing on the main stuff, is sometimes it's not practical enough. I get it. I get how much we want to push the feeling of learning for the sake of learning. So much of this video is about that. But I think in our modern society, sometimes students and professors can get a little bit trapped, especially in humanities, of not realizing how much of the world is still not met its survival needs and how difficult it can still be out there. Things are great compared to 1,000 years ago, yes, but we can't just have students going into gender studies majors. Nothing wrong with gender studies as a study, but just going in there and not realizing, fully appreciating just how hard it's going to be to leverage that outside of the classroom. And I think overall, humanities professors could do more with having discussions about practicalness and the reality of some of the stuff that we're talking about. We'll get more into that in the third part, which I'm realizing this is going to be 3 parts now, otherwise it's going to be too long, about how to leverage a lot of our college education for the real world. But overall, humanities are sometimes not practical enough. The last part that I wanted to focus on in this whole thing about instilling subject matter knowledge is what it is that we're not teaching, which we really should be. Now, we need to be careful here as I say this. I'm not saying everything we teach in college, that your calculus class or your psychology class or your anthropology or your political science class is useless. Obviously, I'm not saying that. What I'm trying to push here is getting you to contemplate what is the ideal scenario that a student comes out of college with. Let's say we have person A who's like deeply knowledgeable about political science or calculus or physics or whatever, one of the traditional things that we've taught them. And yet they have none, almost none, of what I'm about to mention. I want you to really feel into the sense of wrongness that comes up for you as I keep mentioning all the things that I'm about to say, and reflect on what that might mean for what we teach and how we teach inside of college. Here's the list. This is the ultimate college education. If this was the standard for what college teaches, I think we would be in a much better situation, and then we would be bringing in what we're teaching now more. But unfortunately, we're in the situation where we have to push this instead. So here's the golden list of things that we should be teaching in college that we're not right now. Spirituality, everything I've just mentioned. Love, consciousness, knowing, not taught almost at all. Self-actualization. Notice I'm not saying self-improvement. Self-improvement, helpful. It's actually later down on this list. But self-actualization transcends self-improvement. Self-improvement is still rooted in, I'm not good enough, I need to improve myself. Self-actualization is all about the growth needs, the transcendence of the survival needs. Self-reflection, like meditation, contemplation, yoga, parts work from internal family systems. Metaphysics, like consciousness and relativity, non-duality, psychedelics, God realization. You don't need to know what all those are, but those are also really valuable. Conscious education, like conscious learning and conscious teaching, which is some of the stuff we're talking about right now. Developmental psychology and spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics is a theory of human development. Imagine how useful it would be for people to understand, be aware of how humans develop. Awareness is the first step to change. Politics, government, and society. And I don't mean what is traditionally taught in political science. Maybe you do teach what I'm about to say, but I'm really talking about the root of politics, government, and society. First principles. Why does it work the way it does? What is collective ego? What is selfishness? What is the underlying mechanisms leading people to act in the way they do in society? And what does that say about politics and government? Epistemology, like systems thinking and holism. Self-help, like dating and attraction, productivity, time management, humor and charisma, diet and health, creative expression, self-regulation, how to build intrinsic motivation. Life purpose. Isn't it relegated to the advisors and the career advisors? Why aren't we teaching it in college? A mastering college course. Imagine how useful that would be if something like this entire video or 3-part series was taught as a course the first semester of college. Imagine how powerful that would be for students. And then finally, financial freedom and wage entrapment. I don't think a lot of students appreciate the degree of capitalism that we're in the US right now. And when they exit, they don't see that college sets you up to work in traditional society, not in a way where you're going to become financially free. You are trading your time for money, which isn't necessarily bad, but a lot of students don't realize that's the reality of the situation. Like, if you stop working, that's it. You're not getting any money. And the only reason I know about this is because I've been in the content creation space this whole time, which is all about financial freedom and building a business which makes money passively and allows you to be free from this wage entrapment. But that's not talked about enough inside of college. So those are 3 more principles of what you should be really seeking in college. It's been a joy being in this series with you. I hope you've grown by experiencing this so far. I want to end before going to part 3 by saying ultimately everything that I've been talking about inside of this whole series, it's fundamentally in that you are the ultimate thing to be working on in college. Everything you learn, even if it's physics, even if it's calculus, external, it seems so external to you. Everything is through your own consciousness, your relationship to it. My whole life, I was studying the external world, and it took me until now to realize that the ultimate course in college is you. Because you are everything. Because it's your relationship that participates in everything you study. And unfortunately, right now, there is no college course on you. You need to make college that course. And what I'm trying to do is make that course for you to fill the gap that college does not give. But I'm not going to be here forever. At some point, you're going to finish all these videos, and you're not going to see anything in college. And when that happens, you are the one that is going to continue building that course in yourself, in others, and in society at large. All right, that's it. I'm done here. If you want to learn more from me, check out part 3, and also check out my newsletter in the description below. It is all about more of what we're discussing here. Join 3,500 other freshman elite college students and recently tenured professors learning more about building a college system that's more knowledgeable, loving, and conscious. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and bye-bye.